Well, welcome everyone to another edition of Beyond the Touchline. Nick, how is your German? How's your German language skills?
Ja, das ist gut, ja.
Wunderbar, wunderbar, excellent. Well, I know you and I both grew up watching Germany just kind of dominate World Cups in the 70s and 80s. It seemed like they were always in the final. So wondering about their prospects this summer and those prospects of other German-speaking nations that are going to be here, like Austria and Switzerland. So thought, who better to get on and talk to us about it than Derek Ray? What do you think of when I say the name Derek Ray, Nick?
He's from that long tradition of great Scottish commentators. And, he's another one, I believe, that started his career in hospital radio.
He did. In Aberdeen Hospital Radio, in fact, where he's from. So that makes three of us now that we've had on Beyond the Touchline who started in hospital radio. We'll finish in hospital radio, probably. We'll finish in hospital. But yeah, he grew up in Aberdeen, but he's really, I've crossed paths with him many, many times. He was an ESPN colleague for many, many years. We worked on some of the same leagues together. We worked on some of the same World Cups together. But in the last kind of 10, 15 years, he's really made German football his specialty, and it was always his passion. And so it's brilliant to see that he's actually been able to make that his professional kind of world as well. And he spends a lot of time in Germany, like half the year covering the Bundesliga.
Yeah. And when we first came to this country, I don't know about you, Adrian, there was only 1 hour a week soccer made in Germany.
Yes.
That you could see German soccer once a week. It was one of the few European leagues that had an audience over here. And look at it now, pretty much every game in the Bundesliga you can watch. And yeah.
It was just before you came to the US, just a few years before I did. And I think you caught the end of that soccer in Germany era. And I've just heard so many tales about that football show over the years. So many people, it was their first introduction to the game, wasn't it?
Yep.
Yeah. So anyway, Derek Ray joining us here on Beyond the Touchline from his home on the North Shore of Boston in Massachusetts. So here we go. We're Beyond the Touchline and the esteemed Derek Ray joining us. Derek, how are you, sir? Good to see you. Long time no see.
Yes, hi, Adrian. Hi, Nick. Nice to be with both of you at the end of a long season. Every season is long, of course, with so many competitions nowadays, but currently just getting my head into the World Cup, as we always do before these tournaments. And it's always a case of, for some countries, starting with a blank sheet of paper, but with regard to the likes of Germany, thankfully not.
Yeah, and I know the World Cup plays a pivotal role in your sort of personal journey and story and career, and it really, take us back to 1994 when you first landed on these shores, and kind of your recollections and memories of doing what you did in World Cup '94 there in Foxborough, playing a big role at Gillette Stadium, and kind of how you now kind of equate that with where the game has gone since and what we're now looking at this summer.
Yeah, I think when I go back in time to 1994, it all seems like an innocent period in the world comparatively. And I think that probably would be true for most people. I was a young broadcaster, worked for the BBC for 5 years, but decided I wanted to be involved in the World Cup in 1994 with it coming to the USA. So I got myself on a plane and did some freelance reporting and commentating and bits and pieces, having left the BBC, and ran into a guy called Jim Trecker, who still is one of my heroes. Jim was the head of media for the World Cup Organizing Committee in the USA and had worked for the Cosmos previously, for the old NASL back in the day, back in the 1970s. And sometimes you just hit it off with somebody, and we really hit it off. And he said to me, I would love to have you as one of my lieutenants, if you like, one of my press officers. And Boston was the logical place because England were actually coming there in 1993 to play in the US Cup. Lost to the USA.
Remember it well, Derek.
Game. Yeah, I'm sorry, guys, talking to as a Scot to two English people here, but that was not a great England performance. And of course, they were to miss out on the World Cup. But luckily, I had that job as the press officer, which was really a fascinating job because as a non-American, it introduced me to the culture in the USA, how the media works differently in the USA. And back then, it was a very hostile media to our sport, I have to say. And that was one of the big challenges, was having to meet with and talk to columnists who had a lot of power in the Boston area, who frankly didn't like our sport at all and wished it would go away. So that was sort of role one. The other one was to actually set up a media operation, which I had no experience of doing prior to that. So that was a learning curve. Being a languages person, that I think was one of the other things that attracted Jim to having me do it. And of course, then the great thing was Argentina were in our venue, and that meant Maradona. And I didn't speak a word of Spanish at that point, but did a crash course in it that winter, knowing that I'd be dealing extensively with Argentinian journalists. And so I think those are the great memories. You know, it was the old Foxborough Stadium.
Yeah.
Before we ever knew about Gillette or the new incarnation of it. And yeah, an innocent time. And when I think back, it was mostly people inside the stadium who were living in the USA, but from those countries, or maybe not from those same countries, but from other countries. It was before the time when people automatically saved up to go to a World Cup. Some people did it, but I remember thinking this is very much a World Cup for the people in the USA like us who love the sport, but have been starved of it for however many years, and we're getting to experience that. So yeah, different time, same place when we compare and contrast now, but a special time.
Yeah.
I went to all of the games in '94 that were in Dallas because I was living in Texas. And that was my impression too, is that there were very few international people there. A lot of people from the diaspora of that country.
Yeah.
But everybody seemed to be very au fait with what was, with America. They seemed very comfortable, even though they were maybe wearing their national dress and, supporting their team. A lot of the Americans, though, at that time that went to the games, I felt like they didn't really understand they didn't have the depth of the understanding that they have now about the game. And so there was that kind of that juxtaposition of the people that knew the game that were in the States, and then the people that were being exposed maybe to the first time. It was really, it was still fun. It was a great atmosphere, but it was definitely a different time than what we see now.
Yeah, and going back, Nick, to that World Cup, we had a game in Boston between Bolivia and South Korea, and that was a sellout. Yeah, and there was a 0-0 draw. It wasn't the greatest match at that World Cup, but it was a sellout. And I remember thinking, because prior to '94, it was not the norm for matches to sell out at the World Cup. I think nowadays younger people assume this has always been the case, but it wasn't. And I remember saying to somebody, it's only here that you could put on Bolivia against South Korea in 1994 and have it be a hot ticket item. And that was true of quite a few matches at that World Cup. So I think you're right. I think a lot of the people who went there were either, from those countries originally, had moved to the USA, or were Americans who were a bit curious, a bit bemused by it. The tickets didn't cost the earth. I mean, they weren't cheap compared to European prices back then, relative to what is being charged now. I remember at the time not thinking these are out of kilter with the times. So interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. And here we are, 32 years later, and with 24 additional teams to what we had in 1994, staring at World Cup 2026, which you're going to be a massive part of, Derek. And wanted to get your thoughts on a few of the nations that we're going to be watching in 2026, and your specialty, of course, the country you've built a lot of your more recent career around is the Bundesliga and Germany. So why don't we start with Germany and just get your kind of your sort of 10,000 foot view of where you think they are heading into this tournament, given the recent history, and they remain the only European team to have won a World Cup in the Americas, which they did in 2014 in Brazil. But the last two World Cups have been relatively disappointing for them. So where do you think they are, in your view, heading into 2026?
Well, to give you the overview, Adrian, I split my time between the USA and Cologne. And when I talk to my friends in Cologne, there's not a huge amount of excitement about the World Cup. the German football excitement is not really derived from the national team to a great extent. Doesn't mean that people don't watch the World Cup or won't watch the World Cup when it's on and when Germany play. But, the Bundesliga is very proud of the fact that it has the highest average attendance anywhere in the world. It doesn't matter what the game is, first division or second division. You're talking about packed venues and very reasonable prices. And it is the people's game very much in Germany. We won't go into the politics of the last World Cup in particular, but suffice it to say in Qatar, it didn't really strike a chord, that World Cup in Qatar, with most Germans, even people who are fanatical about football. And the TV viewing figures were proof positive of that. They were very low in Germany relative to other countries. And of course, the team was a bit of a disappointment on the pitch. So this time around with Julian Nagelsmann, they have all said that they don't want political or social issues to be front and center, that people, of course, have their own private views, but they want to get on with trying to do as well as possible in a football tournament. I think that Nagelsmann is an interesting guy, interesting coach. Been following his career for a long, long time, from his very early days at Hoffenheim when he was, the youngest coach to be a head coach in the Bundesliga, and learned an awful lot. Of course, Hoffenheim had been Ralf Rangnick's club.
Yep.
Ralf Rangnick, who I know we'll get to later, the father of the gegenpressing approach, counter-pressing. So Nagelsmann was steeped in that. But then as he built his career and moved on to Leipzig and then to Bayern, he became more of a balanced coach, believing in counter-pressing, but also in the value of possession and this sort of mixture, but quite dynamic football. And, there's a lot to like about his style. I think it's pleasing to the eye. What I have noticed, though, is that there's been a change in the last couple of years. Now, what I mean by that is when he first took over the reins, he was all about, and I'll use the German word here, the Leistungsprinzip, which means the performance principle.
Yeah.
So think about it as a player who maybe is not normally part of the national team, suddenly has a great run of form in the Bundesliga, and Nagelsmann would call that player up. And it happened with a good example is Maximilian Mittelstädt, who made the move from Hertha to Stuttgart. Bit of a journeyman fullback, suddenly played out of his skin, and Nagelsmann said, right, you're playing so well, you're going to be named in my national team, and he was part of the national team at the Euros. In recent months, in the last year or so, he's moved away from that. And he's looking much more now at who fits what he's trying to do, irrespective of form. And a good example of that would be Leon Goretzka of Bayern. He was out of the national team picture for a long time. I think most of us reckoned you're not going to see Goretzka again playing for the national team, and he's leaving Bayern this summer. So why is Nagelsmann suddenly flirting with him again? Well, the reason is that he's looking at his team and thinking, okay, I could go by form, and this might be interesting to Nick as a coach. I could go by form, but I also need component parts that fit. And if you look at the central midfielders for Germany, they're all quite similar. They're all quite good technically. The sort of carbon copies a little bit of each other. What Goretzka has is height, of course, which can be really useful either from the start or coming on as a substitute. Goretzka has even from time to time filled in as a defender, though that wouldn't be where Nagelsmann would want to put him. But it's just having that somebody who's good in the air as well as those other qualities, or to balance out the player who play with him, who I expect to be Alexander Pavlovich of Bayern. So without getting into too many more specifics, I know we've got time to dissect them all. I think Nagelsmann's evolution is always interesting, and he's constantly changing. He's not everybody's friend in Germany. He's become a little bit curt in some of his media appearances with regard to particular players. Dennis Undav is a favorite of many of the fans because he's a crowd pleaser. He maybe doesn't do everything that the coach wants him to do, but he can come up with these amazing, spectacular moments, and, won the game for them recently against Ghana. Nagelsmann was a little bit sort of grumpy, I would say, in his interview when the questions came up, well, surely you can't leave out Undav, and he sort of didn't want to be drawn on that. So that's the kind of the overview. I think the feeling, I would say this, guys, the feeling in Germany at the moment is that, yeah, the team is good, but the question would be, are they of the level of, say, France and Spain, Argentina, England, or are they just below? Could they beat any of those countries? They probably could. I must say I have my doubts in one or two positions that we can get to. I think Germany can go far, but there are some question marks hovering over this squad, I feel.
I see that also even with the See, we have a German in charge of the English team now, where he's not necessarily picking what people consider to be the best players, but everything has to fit together. And it becomes more like how you would construct a club team, but obviously with a little bit more selection problems that you do have at the national level. You can't just go out and buy someone. But I definitely see that. It's interesting to hear that Nagelsmann is doing, a similar thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's clearly what he's looking at. He's trying to, I think, learn from what happened at the Euros. And there was a lot that went right at the Euros for Germany.
Yeah.
If you think back, I mean, they could easily have won that tournament. They ran into Spain.
Sure.
It was a 50-50 game. And there was the controversial handball, Cucurella handball decision. Spain were probably the best team at the Euros over the peace. Germany weren't all that far behind, I think. And so there was quite a bit of optimism after that. Since then, they've had, some ups, but downs as well. In particular, the defeat at the hands of Slovakia that made people think, Germany might actually have to really work hard just to get to the World Cup, might have to go through playoffs, but it didn't entail that in the end. I mean, if I were to go through the squad, I mean, when I say I have question marks, it might surprise some people to learn that Kimmich of Bayern, Joshua Kimmich, who's a super footballer, I think somebody who really interprets that position, number 6 or sometimes number 8, if you want to call it that, could play there as well as anybody in the world. But Nagelsmann will use him as a right back.
Yeah.
That has been decided already.
Yeah.
He will be the right back for Germany. And, he's probably the best option there because they don't have anybody better who can play that position. And Kimmich is intelligent enough and versatile enough to be able to play there. Oliver Baumann will be the goalkeeper. Baumann of Hoffenheim was very experienced, has a great record in the Bundesliga when it comes to saving penalties. But again, he's not Manuel Neuer. And that, again, is if there's a mistake by Baumann at any point, then unfortunately everybody's going to say, oh, well, if Neuer had been there, maybe he would have made that save,
Right.
And that goes with the territory when it comes to a top keeper like Neuer and then the person who's unfortunate enough to have to fill his gloves. But Baumann's very capable. If you've watched Bayern enough in the Champions League and in the Bundesliga, you'll know how good and commanding Jonathan Tah is as a central defender, a very modern defender. And what I like about the combination with him and Nico Schlotterbeck of Dortmund is that one's right-footed, one's left-footed. Schlotterbeck is the exquisite passer, can ping a lovely long-range pass with his left foot and has tenacious qualities, reads the game very well too. So for me, they are the standout partnership in central defence. I think on the left, you have some interesting decisions there. David Raum of Leipzig has sort of emerged as Nagelsmann's preferred player there, gets forward very well, crosses a lot, sets up chances at club level for Leipzig and for Germany. And I think he has a leg up on Nathaniel Brown, the young player who's come through at Frankfurt, but they've been going through a bad patch, and Mittelstädt from Stuttgart, who I mentioned earlier on. And then you get to the centre, and again, it'll be sort of a 4-2-3-1, and you have not Kimmich, as I mentioned, but probably Pavlovic and maybe Goretzka playing with him. And Felix Metscher of Dortmund would be a candidate, but he's picked up an injury at the wrong time. So those two. You've also got others, people like Anton Stach, who might be in the mix as well, but I don't think as first choice players in that constellation. And then you get to the area where Germany are really spoiled for choice when you look at the sort of the attack. And I've said it's a 4-2-3-1, but it can be a sort of a revolving door front four. And when you have players like Jamal Musiala, granted he's coming back from a pretty serious injury, but has been back for a few months now. Florian Wirtz, I know, had his early problems settling in at Liverpool, but again, a fantastic footballer. Lennart Kahr, who's the up-and-coming Wunderkind in German football, and looks and plays a bit like Messi, left-footed and moves a bit like Messi as well. It's a real shame that Serge Gnabry is going to miss the World Cup because he has had the season of his career. I feel really sorry for him because I think he would have figured very prominently. So then, and this is where I have one or two doubts, is in attack for Germany. Who do you put there? And Nagelsmann, I think, is attracted by the idea of a true centre-forward, an old-fashioned sort of centre-forward, somebody who can play with his back to goal, lead the line. But the players, unfortunately, who would fall in that category have been injured. Tim Kleindienst and Niklas Füllkrug. So you're often left then, Nagelsmann seems to quite like this, you're left then with Kai Havertz playing as, if you like, the centre forward or the false nine, whatever you want to call it. But of course, there are three other players who are sort of moving around in that area too. It's not perfect, but it could be workable. And, you look at that team and you think, that's all right. That could go quite far, that particular 11. My worry, though, is that once you get beyond the 11 and you're having to make a lot of changes, and that's often a factor in a big tournament like this, are Germany quite of the standard to be World Cup winners? Is this 2014 again? Is it 2018 again when it was just absolutely miserable? Last one wasn't much better. Or is it sort of somewhere in between?
Right. And that's a great breakdown of strengths and potential weaknesses of the German squad. But well, how about the mentality, Derek? Because we all grew up in an era where it was almost automatic that Germany, or West Germany as they were at that time, would get to a final or pretty close to a final. They were always going to be a factor in whatever World Cup they played in. I think the run of 74 to 90 is almost unparalleled, isn't it? And I know that was West Germany and a different era, but is there still some of that mentality in when it comes to Germany and tournament football and knockout football?
Well, it's an interesting question. I'm not sure. I think the mentality is still there in terms of German footballers are professionals. It's a very hard school. If you just talk to anybody who's not from Germany, moves to Germany at a young age. I remember Owen Hargreaves telling me this years ago, saying he's so glad that he landed in Germany because it taught him an awful lot. He said, I was a clueless youngster, and at Bayern, they really taught me how to be a professional. And so I think that is still there, and I think that desire to win is still there. But it's a new generation, isn't it? And things change with generations, and the sort of the old qualities that we associate with certain countries maybe don't apply quite as much. And having said that, I think there is a winning culture at Bayern. And what we're seeing at Bayern right now is we're seeing a big change from the days when their campus, as they call it, their players from within the system were not really given a chance. Most of them would move on to other clubs, and Bayern would view them more as sort of assets, chess pieces to be sold on and make a little bit of money. And nowadays that they're looking at these young players, and Bayern have 9 teenagers who they have deployed in the Bundesliga at various times this season. Many of these players weren't really very well known until they first set foot on the pitch at the Allianz Arena, and now they are known. And I think there's a feeling of confidence that German football might be back with some of these young players, but we don't really know that. I mean, Carr obviously is somebody who's going to figure prominently at this World Cup for Nagelsmann. There's a player in Köln. I don't think he'll stay in Köln for too much longer, sadly, Said El Mara. Whether this is a bit too early for him, not sure, but it probably is. But he's somebody we'll be hearing from in years to come. So the younger players are there. I think people mentioned Ta and praised him, Kimmich. I mean, they are winners. They are ultimate winners with that right mentality and desire. And look at the trophies that they have won. Look at Ta with Leverkusen, one of the big leaders when they did the double, the German domestic double, and almost made it a treble, falling at the final hurdle in the Europa League. So, yeah, I think the mentality is still there. I don't doubt that. My question is whether the overall quality from top to bottom is, and I realize I'm setting a very high bar for this, but whether that quality is good enough to be able to say, Germany are in the conversation, definitely in the conversation as regards teams who can win it. And I'm not quite sure. Could be, but I'm not quite sure that they're Spain or France.
Yeah. Do you think the bookies have it right, Derek, where they've placed them? Just as you said, France and Spain are the clear favourites. Then you've got an Argentina, England, maybe. We have questions about that. Brazil. Germany just outside that. Do you think they have it right where they're placing them maybe 5th or 6th favourites?
Yeah, I think that's honestly where most people in Germany would put them as well.
Yeah.
Again, there are cultural reasons why German fans don't get excited about their national team or carried away in the manner of certain other countries. That there is history there. And, flag waving is not a thing in Germany, really. And again, we know why. But, yeah, I would think that most German fans would look at this team and think, quarterfinals might be a possibility, but beyond that, we're not entirely sure. I mean, again, it depends upon who they face. And I think there is a strong possibility they can get France if everything goes according to the form book earlier than you would want to be playing France. And, Germany could beat France, let's face it. I mean, they could beat France in a one-off game. It's not impossible. But again, there are just one or two holes there that make you think, maybe this is not the best team on paper in the tournament.
We were brought up on the Gary Lineker quote, right, Adrian? Yeah, the football
infamous
being a simple game and 22 men chasing the ball, and at the end, the Germans always win.
Yeah. And I think he made that quote in 1990.
Yes, he did.
England having just lost in the semi-final to West Germany.
I have a quick personal question, Derek, about when did you learn German?
It's a long story, Nick. It goes back to my young days in Aberdeen. I'm from the northeast of Scotland in Aberdeen, and the 74 World Cup was the first one that I was able to take an interest in. I was a bit too young for 1970. Born in 67. 74 World Cup was sort of my nirvana. I watched every game with my dad and became obsessed with not just with international football, but also with Germany. And of course, we had the two Germanys in that World Cup, East and West. Yeah. And East Germany famously beat West Germany earlier in the competition, but West Germany went on to win it. You know, remarkable story that night in Hamburg. Plenty of documentaries about that night in Hamburg when the East Germans prevailed. But it definitely left a mark with me, and I wanted to learn German. And luckily, we got our chance at school in those days a year or so later, and you were either in the French class or the German class. And as the fates conspired to make it happen for me, I was in the German class. And just found that I loved the language. I found that it really spoke to me. And in those days, we had a direct radio link, because of where Aberdeen is, you know, right across the North Sea with Hamburg in northern Germany. So I used to listen to radio from Hamburg very regularly. And so without even really knowing it, it was improving my German. And I was listening to the Bundesliga, the Konferenz broadcasts in German from Hamburg. And just sort of built it up from there, and then made a connection with a school really in the middle of nowhere, right in the center of Germany. In fact, right on the border of East and West. You know, when I say right on the border, I mean I would wake up in the morning and I'd open the curtains and there was an East German border guard with binoculars literally just a few meters away, you know, looking over. And that's how close it was. So culturally, it was quite an experience as well. And, you know, I've always had it. It's always been part of me. But as Adrian said in the introduction, it's really only the last sort of 15 years in broadcasting that I've been able to prioritize German football, because you have to be, as we know, you have to be with a channel that covers a particular brand of football, a particular league. And I'd never worked for a channel that had Bundesliga rights, nor was there an awful lot of interest in anybody acquiring Bundesliga rights. But that changed when I was back working for ESPN UK for a few years, and then BT Sport took over their rights and they invited me to carry on doing it. And then not long after that, the Bundesliga decided that they wanted to have their own specific service with commentary to send around the world with English language commentary. And I became part of that pretty much off the bat, or certainly in the first season of them doing that. And that remains a great labor of love. I spend a lot of time in Germany and in German venues. When I'm not commentating, I love going down the divisions to third division matches, fourth division matches. And in fact, this weekend, I'm hoping to see Fortuna Köln get promoted from their division, from the fourth tier into the third. And yeah, as we know, it's all part of what makes the sport the great sport that it is. It's all wider extension of community.
Yeah, I was a French and Spanish major, and I feel like that gives you such an insight into the culture of a country. And I actually got to play for a year in France. And when you're over there and living it, it just gives you a totally different perspective on what you might consider life to be like there if you've never visited. It's totally different.
Yeah, it gives you an insight, absolutely, Nick. It gives you an insight into a conversation that might otherwise be a private one. I will say that if you have a language, doesn't matter what the language is, if you have that language, that linguistic ability, it enables you to communicate with people in a way that will never happen when you don't speak that language. And so, yeah, I'm very grateful that I got the chance years ago to learn German. And I think, and you might know this from your time in France, once you start dreaming in a language, you've crossed the Rubicon, and it's most definitely part of you.
Well, just to tie a bow on this, Derek, growing up as you did in Aberdeen means you were the exact polar opposite in the UK from Nick, who grew up in Torquay. So we're talking extreme southwest to northeast.
Southwest to northeast, yeah, that's right.
Which was, Torquay is totally full of Glaswegians.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because I remember hearing, when I first moved to Glasgow to work for the BBC, I remember Torquay being a very common summer place for the Glaswegians. So, where are you going on holiday? Oh, Torquay as usual, you know? So, yeah.
Great stuff. Well, we're talking to Derek Ray here on Beyond the Touchline. We'll take a quick break and then come back with a little Austria and Switzerland. Here we are back on Beyond the Touchline with Derek Ray giving us some insight on what to expect from the Germanic nations, shall we call it that? The German-speaking nations that will be part of the World Cup this summer. We're going to get a little Scotland in there too. How can we not with Derek on board? But let's talk Austria first, Derek, because they are making a long overdue return to the World Cup stage, first time since 1998, similar to Scotland, in fact. And yeah, under Ralf Rangnick, they have developed a really interesting identity. I wonder what you think the prospects are for Austria this summer, given they're in the A group, as I like to call it, with Argentina, Algeria, and then Jordan as the outliers. What do you make of their prospects?
Well, first of all, I personally have missed Austria because 1998, the last time they were at the World Cup, that seems crazy, doesn't it? Because great football nation and have had super players down the years, but a bit of a barren spell when it comes to the World Cup. I think you have to give Ralf Rangnick a lot of the credit for their revival. And I mentioned Rangnick earlier in the answer about Julian Nagelsmann. And Rangnick, for me, and I don't know if this is the case so much in the English-speaking world, but certainly the German-speaking world, Rangnick is one of the sort of the 3 or 4 biggest influences on the modern game. And maybe in case people don't know, Nick will know very well. Rangnick is the guy who first appeared on a German TV show a long time ago now when he was an unknown coach at Ulm and explained his ideas, which at the time were revolutionary. And people mocked him a little bit, when he first tried to explain what he wanted to do. But he's the father of gegenpressing, counter-pressing. And the idea really is, it's a simple idea. It's not so much what you do with the ball, but it's what you do against the ball, without the ball, but also in particular in that crucial moment when possession changes hands and sort of how organized you are at that particular time. And the idea behind gegenpressing is, if you like, it's the short route to goal, so that if you press high, if you have players intent upon pressing high, the quick ball win, being organized for the quick ball win, and then 2 or 3 passes later, if you're well enough organized and you have the players to do it, then you score. Sounds easy, doesn't it? Obviously making it work doesn't happen every single time, but that is the Rangnick way. You think about the number of coaches, Klopp is a good example of that, the number of coaches who have bought into that, certainly in the German world, but in other parts of the world too. So this is the style that you'll see with Austria. You could call it, power football. You could call it gegenpressing. But I think he has the players to make it work. You have to be dynamic. I don't think it's a style of play that is suitable for, 4 players who are 33 or 34 years of age, necessarily. You need athleticism, you need fitness, you need pace, certainly within your ranks to make it happen. Rangnick, who is German, has, I think, done very well with putting his own mark on the Austrian squad. And, if you look up and down the team, if I just go from sort of 1 to 11, who I would be thinking might be there for Austria. Alexander Schlager in goal, modern sort of keeper, plays for Salzburg, who are, very much of the gegenpressing school, pretty calm figure. Not the tallest, but technically good, as you have to be in the setup, good with the ball at his feet. And then, Konrad Laimer has had a really good season with Bayern. We used to think of him as a pressing midfield player, but might end up at right back for Austria, can also be a pressing monster in midfield. Kevin Danzo and Philipp Lienhardt, I think, are probably first choices for the central defensive positions, although David Alaba, of course, is in the mix too, but whether he's going to be fit, I'm not sure. Stefan Posch is another candidate, can play on the right or in the centre. And then on the left, you have Alexander Prass from Hoffenheim, you have Philipp Mwene from Mainz. So you go down this list and it's pretty much a Bundesliga 11.
Yeah.
This is very much a sort of a German League 11, not quite up to the standard of Germany, still pretty good. Maximilian Wöber from Werder Bremen, who's been injured most of the season. Could he get back? He's left-sided and can never have enough players in reserve who are left-footed. And then you get to the midfield, and it's sort of, a bit like Germany, 4-2-3-1. And you have Nicolas Seiwald from Leipzig, the sort of the prize pupil, if you like, of Rangnick. Yeah. I think in all the years he's been in charge, he's missed only 4 or 5 matches. And he's absolutely indispensable as the sort of the sitting player in midfield next to Xaver Schlager, normally left-footed player who can mix it a bit as well, but also good on the ball. And then you have Paul Wanner, who's one of the bright talents who chose Austria over Germany, born in Germany, could have chosen Germany, but through his mother was able to select Austria. And he, again, left-sided and can fill a number of different roles. And then I'm particularly excited about the three kind of off the one up front. So Baumgartner from Leipzig is having an exceptional season. And he, again, is a sort of a prototypical player for this way of playing, for this counter-pressing. All action will get in on goal scoring, in on ball winning, good against the ball too. Marcel Sabitzer, very experienced, probably in the centre. Romano Schmid of Werder Bremen, who I watched at the weekend, who's they used to call him Driblansky in his younger days. That tells you about the kind of player he is. But he's not just an entertainer. He's consistently high up the running statistics in the Bundesliga, so gets through a power of work. And then in attack, you have Marko Arnautovic, who's the record goal scorer. And if you want to give him a break, you have Michael Gregoritsch, also got, 70 caps or so, and Sasha Kalajic. So there is, that 11 is not a bad 11. In terms of the group they're in, as you said, Argentina, Algeria, which of course brings back memories, not such great memories, of 1982 and the disgrace of Gijón, as it's still referred to in Germany, actually, when West Germany and Austria, in case people don't know, knew that they could essentially carve things up with a 1-0 win for West Germany. They'd both go through. Algeria would be out, and Horst Rubesch scored early on, and the rest is history. Not great visual history for sure. But I think that Austria should be in good shape. I was listening to Herbert Prohaska recently, one of the all-time greats for Austria, saying that he thinks it would be embarrassing if they didn't get it out of this group. Now, that's a dangerous thing to say. I don't think you would catch Rangnick saying that. But I think they ought to be favourites to go through in the top two in this group with Argentina. Their first game is against Jordan in San Francisco, which might be a tester, because this is always the interesting thing for a counter-pressing team. How do you fare when suddenly you are the team that's going to have a lot more possession, which I think will be the case against Jordan. And sometimes that can be a challenge if you're more accustomed to waiting for the dynamic moments against the ball and the quick ball win. Maybe that's not going to be so applicable against Jordan in the first game.
As a coach, I would be a little concerned about this Red Bull influence tactics coming to the United States, where the temperature and humidity is going to be so high.
Yeah. Good point. It's a good point. And I've heard that said by a few people who've come to the USA, that maybe you have to temper it a little bit. Whether they'll get somewhat lucky with, I don't know, San Francisco in June might not be as blistering hot as some venues, but I suppose it could be, couldn't it? And that's absolutely right. That this is the one thing about that style of play, is it probably is better suited to a rainy November day in Vienna rather than a searing hot day in an American summer.
How does Arnautovic fit into this?
Yeah, and that's a good point, because he's not the obvious one for that. He relies a lot on the Baumgartner, on Sabitzer, on Schmid to do a lot of the legwork. And I think it's true, isn't it? While I've sort of given Rangnick the big build-up as the gegenpressing guy, I think this is true of just my opinion, of every national team coach versus a club coach. I think you have to be more of a pragmatist at national team level, don't you? Because you don't have the luxury of being able to pick every single ideal player who plays a certain style. You sometimes have to say, okay, well, he's much better than him, so I have to take him, even though it's not going to work with the style that I necessarily want to play. So yeah, I mean, I think that Arnautovic is probably not going to be going 90 minutes in most of the games, but Gregoritsch, who I watch a lot in the Bundesliga, again, is no youngster, but somebody who I think is well equipped to play this style of football.
Derek, if form and momentum count for anything heading into a sort of isolated tournament, I don't know if it does, but it can't help, it can't hurt, can it, to be in good form. They finished ahead of Bosnia in qualifying, took 4 points out of 6 from them. They hammered Norway, who were a lot of people's sort of dark horse favourites just a year and a half ago, beat them 5-1, and that was a full-strength Norway team as well. Just beat Ghana 5-1 and South Korea 1-0 in the last set of friendlies. They were a factor in Euro 24, weren't they? They got out of a tough group featuring Netherlands and Poland.
Yeah, I think there's often a tendency to sort of overlook Austria for whatever reason. Never quite sure why. I suppose you could say, well, they haven't been at the World Cup since 1998, so that's why people don't maybe take them as seriously as we should. I'm slightly biased because I'm a bit too close to these players because I see them all the time. And I think that is sometimes something you have to take into account when you cover a particular league. I hear this sometimes with people who cover MLS in the United States. They're very big on certain players because they're seeing those players all the time. Well, I'm the same with the Bundesliga. I'm seeing all these players every week. So sometimes the shade of odds from me will go to those players when somebody else will go, nah, that's just an ordinary player. But I do think that, Lima is having the season of his career. Wasn't so great in the decisive second leg of the Champions League semi-final against PSG, but is having an extraordinary season, really. And I don't think there are too many weaknesses there. My worry would be that they could get into a situation against a dogged defensive team, and they might struggle to break that team down. And you could ask yourself, having Jordan first, is that good or bad? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But I actually think they have the quality to take something from all three of the matches. It's a matter of whether that happens in reality.
Yeah, interesting. I'm really intrigued by how Austria do this summer. I think they could surprise a lot of people. Nick, do you want to tee us up for Switzerland? Because in some ways they're the polar opposite in terms of recent history, at least.
Definitely. I just want to make a smart comment about how with Kevin Danso, maybe one of the few championship level players to be at the World Cup.
Yeah.
Yes.
All the Tottenham fans are hanging up their phone right now.
Yeah. They're not there yet.
Let's see.
All right. Yeah. So let's look into Switzerland. I think you could almost call Austria kind of Bundesliga light. And I think Switzerland, when you look at the makeup of their squad, it seems like they're spread out all over the place, all over Europe and Italy, Germany, England, Spain, France, Saudi Arabia. What can you tell us about the Swiss team?
I think Switzerland and Austria, though they are neighbours, are quite different in the terms of how they go about their way of playing. Let's talk about Murat Yakin, first of all, the coach, who I used to enjoy watching as a defender. He was very much the defensive chief of Basel. Remember that Basel team that sort of burst onto the scene about, 25 plus years ago with seemingly limited resources, but packed a real punch. And the two Yakins, there was Hakan, who was more of an attacking sort of prompter, and Murat, who was the defensive leader. So he's the coach. And what I think is interesting about Switzerland is that they are very flexible, and he is very flexible, and he will very much adapt to the opponent. So he'll look at what the opponent does and say, okay, we need to be like this for this particular opponent. We need to be a bit more attack-minded. Maybe we lose a midfield player for this opponent. Maybe we have an extra one for a more challenging opponent. But, his record is really good. And Switzerland's record is really good. I mean, you can't really argue, can you? With
it's amazing.
Six times in a row. That real consistency. The challenge has been getting beyond that. Okay, you look at Switzerland and you think, yeah, they'll probably get out of the group. They very often do. But then after that, it's sort of the terminus. And they come up against a team slightly better than them, quite find a way to overcome them. That's very often the story with regard to Switzerland. But I think that they're a team, they favour a mixture of quick counters. They're quite happy being a counter-attacking team, but also phases of ball possession and ball control. And I think the midfield players are especially important in that regard. So if I just go down the team, I think they have a very good goalkeeper in Gregor Kobel of Dortmund, pretty confident with the ball at his feet, conceded just 2 goals in 6 matches in qualifying. So there's a very credible figure in goal. When you look at the defence, you would say, yep, 2 solid centre-backs in Manuel Akanji and Nico Elvedi of Gladbach. He's been there for 10 years. And then you look at the full-backs and you're talking about a couple of 33-year-olds. Now, that's nothing against 33-year-olds, but it does tell you that, again, you're looking at experience there rather than dynamic youth or blistering pace with Sylvain Widmer, who's come back to being a regular for Mainz this season. Been the club captain for a long time, but wasn't always getting a game. But you've got him and you've got the evergreen Ricardo Rodriguez now at Betis in Spain. So those two, I would imagine, would be the fullbacks of choice. You've got somebody like Miro Muheim of Hamburg who could make a late push. You've got Luca Hackes of Stuttgart, who we might see in the German Cup final, can be a fullback or a centre-back. He's really more of a centre-back. Also, as a reserve, you've got Aurel Amenda of Eintracht Frankfurt. So there is some depth there. It's actually a reasonable squad in terms of the defensive depth. But the midfield is for me where it gets exciting. And 33 does seem to be the magic number because Granit Xhaka is 33 now. But to me, still, I mean, he's one of my favourite footballers and has been for a long, long time. I sometimes, when he was playing for Leverkusen and I wasn't commentating, I would often just take 5 minutes if I was in the stadium and I would just watch Xhaka. And I would just try and watch how is he moving? What's he doing? How is he anticipating? Where are his passes going? Against the ball, what he's doing? Or what is he doing? And I always thought, okay, I'm not a football coach, but I can really admire Xhaka and his sense of the game and the presence that he has. And he still has got that. You know, he's the record caps holder 144 times, played for Switzerland. And with Xhaka, you have another experienced component in Remo Freuler, who's even older, actually, 34. Bologna, but knows his role. But then you have the exciting player. And to me, this is a player who, if everything goes well, people who don't know him currently, I think, will be raving about him at the World Cup. And that is 20-year-old Johan Manzambi of Freiburg. And he is one of the bright shooting stars, if you like, in German football. And what's great about him is he's very flexible. And Freiburg actually normally have him, this is sometimes the German tendency, you have a good young dynamic player sitting deep and playing almost like a number 6. But Yakin has said he sees him more as a 10, sees him more as somebody who might play ahead of Xhaka and Freuler. So look out for him. He really has been a breath of fresh air in the Bundesliga this season. There's another player who I like in Fabian Rieder, who is left-footed, prompter in midfield. Now with Augsburg, was at Stuttgart. I think it was the right move for him to go to Augsburg. And so he can slot into one of those roles either from the start or off the bench. And then you have, Denis Zakaria, versatile, can be a central midfielder or a centre-back. Gibril Sol, who unfortunately missed the Euros because of a broken toe. You got Vincent Sierro, who Yakin is actually a big fan of, been playing in Saudi Arabia for Al-Shabaab. And so I think, again, that's quite a substantial midfield. And then when you get to the attack, Breel Embolo, I think, fits very well for what they try to do and who they are. Strong physically, pace, can finish. And then out wide, you have choices, people like Ruben Vargas, who's had a good career now in Spain, although his club, Sevilla, not having such a great time of it. And Dan Ndoye of Nottingham Forest. So that's just looking at sort of who might be in the first 11 without going into the sort of the number 16, number 17, number 18. I think they're a little bit underrated, Switzerland. They're a little bit kind of, you look at them and you go, and in the group that they're in, I actually think that I might pick them to win their group. Because they're in there with Canada, Bosnia and Herzegovina,
Qatar,
Qatar, their first opponents in San Francisco. I see no reason why Switzerland can't win the group.
Yeah. Well, they were in with the host nation in 1994, weren't they? And that's actually the first game for the US in that World Cup and ended up getting out of the group too. But the round of 16 always seems to have been their, as you pointed out, their stumbling block. They're rather like Mexico. They can't get beyond the round of 16. Maybe this is the year. If you had to pick one of Switzerland or Austria to kind of make a surprise run deeper into the tournament, and I know there's so many permutations about who you come up against, and we can't accurately assess that, but just your gut instinct, who would you go with?
I'm going to say Switzerland, by a hair. I mean, I actually do like Austria. I do think that there aren't that many obvious weaknesses, but it could go the wrong way. And take the point that Nick made about the gegenpressing style and the blistering heat. I think the balance with Switzerland is a good one. I think there is youth and experience. There's maybe a bit too much in the way of experience, but maybe that's not a bad thing with a national team. And they're all bedded in. They all know their roles. Yakin, I think, is a coach who you should never underestimate. I think he knows how to coach this particular national team. He played so well for Switzerland himself, and I think he's the right guy in charge there. And I think the group does favour them. It probably won't be a cakewalk in any of the games. I wouldn't have thought Canada will be a cakewalk on their own turf, and similar story for Bosnia and Herzegovina, the romantic story, if you like, in terms of how they made it. But I think that Switzerland, with this cast of characters, and Manzambi, definitely the one I would sort of say, if you don't know Manzambi, read up on him and look out for him, with Manzambi front and centre and Xhaka there in midfield as well. I quite like this formula.
Nice. All right, we'll take one more quick break. Nick, did you want to jump in?
I was just going to say that I was reading an article about the average FIFA ratings, whatever you think about them, in the Canadian...
We love those rankings.
Yeah. The Canadian-Swiss group actually had the lowest average.
Yeah.
So it's considered the easiest group out of all the groups. So whatever that means. So.
Yeah. All right. One more quick break, and then, Derek, I know you got to go, but we want to get your thoughts on Scotland, and there's a quick fire round of questions as well to bring you. So just hang tight. Be right back on Beyond the Touchline. Back for the final segment of Beyond the Touchline with the esteemed voice of Derek Ray, one of the voices you'll be hearing a lot of this summer for World Cup 2026. And Derek, you don't have to tell us what your assignments are. I don't know if you're going to get to do a Scotland game. That's always an interesting assignment for any commentator, isn't it, when you get to do a team to whom you have emotional attachments. But give us your, if it's possible, give us your kind of professional, unbiased view on Scotland's long overdue return to the World Cup. And of course, they're going to be playing games in what is your home as well, of Massachusetts.
Yeah, let's start with the positives where Scotland are concerned, Adrian. Obviously, 1998. Long time since last Scotland were at the World Cup. An entire generation has missed out on it. You know, when I was growing up, it was fairly normal for Scotland to be at every World Cup from 74 on.
We remember it well.
Yeah, those were the days. Although struggled to get out of the groups, which is another story. And we'll see what happens this time around. But I think that the way they qualified, I don't think you could qualify in a more dramatic, emphatic fashion.
Right.
The fact of the matter is they were being outplayed by Denmark, and I remember watching the game and thinking, this is just not going to happen. You know, there's not enough guile, there's not enough quality. But the quality of the goals, my goodness. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen that in one game. You know, it started with McTominay and the overhead kick, and then the goals just seem to get progressively better. And, of course, the worry, and Scots are always a bit negative, the worry is that, well, that's our luck used up now. You know, we used all our luck in that one game against Denmark, and it's bound to go the wrong way starting against Haiti. So we'll see about that. The positives are, so let me try and be balanced here. You know, I'm talking as a Scot, but trying to be balanced with regard to the positives and the negatives. And there are both. The positives are, I think, Steve Clarke understands the squad. He understands the players who have served him well, and he's been very loyal to those players. Sometimes you would, and we spoke about Nagelsmann earlier and the performance principle. Sometimes you would say, well, this player deserves a chance or that player deserves a chance because he's in good form. Steve Clarke generally doesn't go by form. He goes by, okay, what has this player done for me in the past versus this player? And he's discarded certain players who clearly don't fit in with how he wants to play. And Steve Clarke is not, I spoke about Rangnick and gegenpressing and Yakin and his balance. Steve Clarke, for me, is a very old school belt and braces sort of manager. Not taking any chances. He'll be quite happy to sit deep. There aren't a lot of sort of new things that you see with how he coaches. I think he's more interested in the pragmatism and this is what we do fairly well. This is what we do not so well. My worry with Scotland is that I don't think that Scotland are a great team in possession. I don't think that the great strength lies in breaking a team down, which could be problematic against Haiti, who are not the best team in the competition, but one assumes they'll be organised, and Scotland can sometimes have difficulties in that sort of situation. Sometimes far better being on the back foot and trying to hit on the break. They have certain individuals, you know, who are of a high standard. People like Andrew Robertson and Kieran Tierney and John McGinn. You know, you'd have to say McGinn just keeps improving. I remember first getting to know John McGinn as a young player, a lovely fellow, but one of the nicest people you'll meet in football. And, you know, his commitment to excellence is really admirable. And he's a leader as well. But in other positions, and you look at Scotland, the goalkeeping position, you know, they've had Craig Gordon in goal, who's, again, a great servant, but is he the best goalkeeper in the tournament or even close to it? I would say no. And, you know, Angus Gunn, another one who's been in goal for Scotland, likewise. I don't think the best goalkeeper in the competition or anywhere close to that. And I think there are doubts about the defence, and I think there are doubts about the attack. Midfield, I think, is the most solid part of the team. And the question, of course, is always how do you incorporate both Tierney and Robertson, who are left-footed players and ideally would sort of be in the same position, and sometimes you cobble it together so that you have Tierney in a different position and Robertson playing as a wing-back. In attack, it's interesting because Lyndon Dykes is the one who Steve Clarke keeps going back to, even though he's not playing at an especially high level and is not known for banging in the goals. But Steve Clarke feels that he needs that sort of workhorse in attack to bring others into it. So I think it's a bit of a guessing game with Scotland. They qualified in such spectacular fashion. You look at the group, and I think it's a difficult one because while Haiti are eminently beatable, Morocco and then Brazil, well, the scale of the task gets that bit more difficult come to matches 2 and 3. But, of course, with this bloated format, it could be that you beat Haiti and you don't get thrashed by the other two, and 3 points might be enough to get you through. And Scotland have never got through before. And that's the one thing about Steve Clarke, is that he is not everybody's favourite in Scotland. A lot of people would like to see other players given an opportunity, but he tends to go to the well that's served him effectively. And he's got Scotland to a couple of tournaments at a time when other managers haven't managed to do that. Now, people will say, well, he's done it with these formats whereby it's much easier to get to the tournaments. So it depends really what your view is on that subject. I just feel, if I'm going to sort of inject my own opinion into this with regard to players who could be there, I would say this almost against myself. As a player in the Bundesliga, Oliver Burke, who plays nowadays for Union. Now, Oliver Burke's been around for a long time in football. He's the fastest player in the Bundesliga, clocked at 37 kilometers per hour. He's not the best footballer in the Bundesliga. He's not the best goal scorer either. And, you could complain about his lack of technique, but I've said for a while now, if the fastest player in the Bundesliga is a Scot, and you have a 26-man squad, and you have a squad that doesn't have an awful lot of pace, because you look at that squad and there is not a ton of pace in that squad. You've got Ben Gannon-Doak, but he's been injured. And to me, it's crying out for a plan B option with pace. And Burke actually does fit that bill. As I said, not the best player. Wouldn't get into the Germany squad or the England squad or the France squad, but this is Scotland we're talking about. But Steve Clarke doesn't ever call him up because he's very loyal to these other players who have been in his squad before. And maybe that's commendable. I don't know. Maybe that's a coach who is comfortable with himself and doesn't want to complicate it by bringing in players who he feels are not going to fit what he's looking for. But I know certainly amongst the fans, there is a feeling that when it comes to a tournament, you do have to have these other options and you have to throw other things at the teams you're playing against. And my worry would be that there aren't enough weapons there for Scotland to be able, let's say they're playing Brazil and let's say they need to get a point. Let's say they're losing 1-0 with 10 minutes to go and you don't have a pacey option on the bench. You don't have somebody who can run at players, even though somebody like Burke, and he's not the only player in this category, but he's an obvious one because he's playing at a high standard in one of the best leagues in the world. If you have that option, wouldn't you want to have a player like that on the bench? That is my worry. I hope it's not the case that Scotland founder because of things like that, but I do think it's a big ask to get out of that group in the top two.
They will be well supported, Derek, if that counts for anything.
Oh, yeah.
Especially in the Northeast.
But they'll be champions of people's hearts. No doubt about that. I mean, in Germany at the Euros, there was a poll done by one of the TV channels. What's the most popular country in terms of fans at this competition? And Scotland came in first, narrowly ahead of the Dutch. Scotland won, Netherlands 2. And I don't think there'll be quite as many Scots in the USA as we had in Germany. Obviously, it was much easier to get to Germany, and that was sort of the trip of a lifetime. And 100,000 Scots were in Germany, so it won't be anything like that. But they will have a good time, and they will make friends very easily.
They'll be off and on the march with Ali's Army.
Ali's Army, because England couldn't do it because they didn't qualify, as we famously remember on that song.
Yeah.
That's the third dig I've heard on England so far.
All right, listen, this has been fantastic, Derek. Just a quick rapid-fire round of questions to get you out the door. With these, we like to just kind of get your most instinctive, knee-jerk type response without thinking about it too much. So, Nick, get the ball rolling. What's
all right, good.
First question?
What's the best atmosphere that you've ever called a game in?
Best atmosphere, the Dortmund-Schalke derby in Germany.
Nice. I thought you might say that. That Dortmund stadium is just amazing. You may have given us this answer earlier on with the Swiss star you were directing our attention to. One player from Germany, Austria, or Switzerland who could genuinely become a breakout star at this tournament.
Well, since I mentioned Manzambi already, let me go for Lennart Kahl of Germany, because I think this could be his stage.
Nice.
Yeah.
One thing that English language audiences misunderstand about German-speaking football culture.
They misunderstand that the concepts that come from Germany are actually very simple concepts, even though they are hidden by long compound words.
Is there a word for that?
There's not an obvious word for that, but it's things like Spielverlagerung, which basically means switch of play, or Gegenpressing, but actually Gegenpressing has come into the lexicon.
Schadenfreude.
Schadenfreude, yeah, very, very true, yeah.
This is a commentator question, Derek, which you may shudder at, but Scotland score against Brazil, you're calling the game. What comes out of your mouth first?
The impossible has happened.
Nothing is impossible. Nothing.
It's a good one.
Yeah.
This is a good one for you. Who's the best co-commentator you've ever worked alongside, and why?
That's such a difficult one, because there've been so many, and I always fear that if I single out one, then I'm going to offend all the others. It's so difficult. I mean, the one who in recent years I've spent most time with, because he's also my partner worldwide on the video game, is Stuart Robson.
Nice.
And Stuart and I think you guys know Stuart as well, is a super bloke, and great fun to be around.
Great stuff. All right, Derek, we'll leave it there. Absolutely fantastic. Great to see you. Great to hear your voice again. And I hope you get to enjoy this summer and all its twists and turns. I know it's always hard work working a World Cup, but it's the absolute pinnacle, isn't it?
No, it is. There's nothing like it, getting into a rhythm, and you're permanently exhausted. You don't sleep very much. I never sleep very much during these tournaments. But yeah, you do have to think this is where you want to be, and there are only so many in a lifetime. So yeah, lap it all up.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you, sir.